In a flurry of diplomacy on Sunday, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskiy held talks with the leaders of the US, France and Turkey. With the war now dragging into a 10th month, there appears to be no end in sight to the deadliest conflict in Europe since World War II. In his nightly address, Zelensky said he was constantly working with partners, adding that he expects some important results next week from a series of international events. It's rare for Ukraine's president to hold talks with all three leaders in just one day. During his call with Biden, the US leader promised to help boost Ukraine's air defense to protect the civilian population. Zelensky said his call with French President Emmanuel Macron earlier in the day had lasted more than an hour. The two leaders spoke about defense, energy, economy, diplomacy, while Zelensky's call with Turkey's President Erdogan focused on making sure Ukraine can export its grain. In turn, Erdogan's office said the Turkish leader also had a call on Sunday with Russian President Vladimir Putin, in which Erdogan had called for a quick end to the conflict. Moscow calls its action in Ukraine a special military operation designed to disarm its neighbour, while Ukraine and its allies say it's an unprovoked act of aggression. On the ground in Ukraine, heavy fighting continues with the entire eastern front line continuously being shelled. Moscow is also targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure, at times cutting off electricity for millions of civilians.
And we're on mains.
NASA's Orion capsule barreled through Earth's atmosphere and splashed down in the Pacific Ocean on Sunday.
Orion under its chutes descending toward splashdown.
Capping the inaugural mission of the U.S. agency's new Artemis lunar program, 50 years to the day after Apollo's final moon landing.
From Tranquility Base to Taurus Littrow to the tranquil waters of the Pacific, the latest chapter of NASA's journey to the moon comes to a close. Orion, back on Earth.
The splashdown capped a 25-day mission less than a week after passing about 79 miles above the moon in a lunar flyby. The gumdrop-shaped Orion capsule carried a simulated crew of 3 mannequins wired with sensors. It plunked down in the ocean off Mexico's Baja California peninsula, demonstrating a high-stakes homecoming before flying its first crew of astronauts around the moon, which could come as early as 2024. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson.
We are adventurers. We are explorers. We always have a frontier, and that frontier is now to continue exploring the heavens.
Re-entry marked the single most critical phase of Orion's journey, testing whether its newly designed heat shield can withstand atmospheric friction and safely protect the astronauts that would be on board. The Artemis program is aimed at returning astronauts to the lunar surface this decade and establishing a sustainable base there as a stepping stone to future human exploration of Mars. It also marks a major turning point for NASA, redirecting its human spaceflight program beyond low Earth orbit after decades focused on space shuttles and the International Space Station.
African delegations have been touching down at an airbase outside Washington, D.C. ahead of this week's US-Africa Leaders Summit. During the event, President Joe Biden is expected to announce support for the African Union's admission to the G20 as a permanent member. That move comes after requests from Senegal's President Macky Sall, who chairs the 55-member body, as well as South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. The Biden administration has been criticized by some as inattentive to Africa. That's a common complaint about US foreign policy, but one that rings louder as China deepens its political and economic involvement on the continent. African countries have received huge sums from Beijing over the past decade, lending that the US characterizes as predatory. In November, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Washington would have to do things differently to help Africa with its infrastructure needs. It was time, he said, to stop treating the continent as a subject of geopolitics, rather than a major player on its own.
As Christmas fast approaches, residents of Sydney, Australia who'd missed out on Black Friday were hitting the shopping malls. Welcome holiday news for retailers wary of inflation. Shoppers, keen to spend money on presents for loved ones, were seemingly unfazed by the economy.
I don't know, maybe everyone's just in that festive mood, so you're just kind of just spending because you just want to spend. So I think, yeah, we do feel it, but it's not, we don't feel it as much because it's just Christmas right now. I think we're still spending because it's just gifts.
Yeah, I think there's always, a desire to spoil people in your life, particularly at Christmas. So there is definitely a pressure there, I guess, more internally. But, I think to an extent, definitely, like we do spend, we will spend more at Christmas time than we might normally, not, particularly given inflation, that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Australia's economy slowed a little in the September quarter as sky-high prices and rising interest rates zapped consumer spending power. Official data last week showed real GDP rose only 0.6% in the third quarter. However, in the run-up to the holidays, things seem to have shifted gears. Paul Zara, CEO of the Australian Retailers Association, said what locals shelled out during Black Friday was a surprise to the industry.
We thought spending would come to a bit of a halt as we approach this all-important Christmas trading period, but in fact we've just gone out recently with our new forecast, and in fact we believe that Aussies will spend a record $66 billion this Christmas, which is $2 billion up on our previous forecast. It's about 6.4% up on last year. So at this moment, and this time and stage, people are continuing to spend, and that's music to retailers' ears.
All that's left now for shoppers is to wrap those presents.